move, but what move should that be? Mike and John Schuster will be talking about that coming up.
You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I wanted to participate in the theme song.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for keeping it Locked On Wildcats. I'm your host, Mike Luke, with John Schuster over there. All right, Shu. The hot rumors out there are that Arizona, ASU, and the mountain schools are going to make a move to try to get into the Big 12. I love the idea of trying to get into the Big 12. I think you're a little bit more skeptical of it. I totally get it. We're going to debate that back and forth. But what it would mean for Arizona going forward is this, in my opinion. First, the only drawback with the Big 12, obviously, is that you worry that it gets swallowed up as well, later on. Totally get that. But I think that it would provide a certain amount of stability for Arizona, at least in the near future, certainly more so than the Pac-12 is giving you right now. And there's name brands in there as well that I think are difficult to get past. We're going to break it all down right here. But what are your initial thoughts on Arizona to the Big 12?
It's not my favorite move, but I'm okay with it. And you and I have talked on a number of occasions, I think on the Locked On platform, maybe even as far back as a year ago, about how something like that with the would be a juggernaut men's basketball conference.
Right.
That would be a lot of really good teams in that group. You have a blue blood in Kansas. You have a team in Baylor that's been a number one seed and won a national title once out of the last 3 years.
Right.
You have Arizona, which is a recognizable brand. And, possibly even if you wanted to swoop up to the Northwest and bring Oregon into the fold, they would be obviously very valuable from a basketball standpoint as well. There's a lot of talent in those two conferences when it comes to men's basketball, but is men's basketball enough to counter NCAA football from a money standpoint? Probably not, but it becomes a very interesting discussion where you and I perhaps differ a little bit, that I'm not convinced the traditional conference model is going to survive. So to me, that the Big 12 is currently, quote unquote, on better footing than the Pac-12 is, I think is up for absolute debate, especially if looking ahead, and these are reports, so maybe they're accurate, maybe they're not. There have been discussions that ESPN and Fox, the two major players in college athletics, are who look like they're going to cut contracts with the SEC and the Big Ten, may not have much of an interest discussing terms with the Big 12 or the Pac-12. And if that's the case, then both conferences are in trouble from a traditional television model. So looking for stability in the Big 12 might be slightly better in the short term,
right,
but I'm not sure how much that helps you 3 to 5 years from now. So keep in mind, a year ago when we were having discussions like this, it's because the Big 12 lost Texas and Oklahoma, which were their foundational members. So the Pac-12 now is going through what the Big 12 went through a year ago. That's bad for both conferences. They are both generally not on stable footing. So my preference in this regard, if era is not so much that the mountain portion of what is now, the four teams remaining ultimately in I guess the Pac-10 gets swallowed up by the Big 12, but that both of them in essence consolidate to create a much larger conference and maybe include some teams, some lingerers from the ACC, possibly from whatever the American Conference is, 2 or 3 of the better teams from the Mountain West, and try to counter with a larger entity that makes things a little bit more interesting. Because there are some intriguing teams out there, especially in the ACC, who aren't being discussed here in terms of immediate consolidation into the SEC. So that would be my preference. I'm not, because again, I'm not convinced that the conference model as we know it and as we think of it is going to exist in 5 years. So why would you want to jump from one uncertain conference to another uncertain conference?
Okay, I can get that, but here let me make the counterpoint then. Let's just say, and again, it's just rumors going around, but let's just say that it's the mountain schools and the Arizona schools that join there. You're instantly, and we're going to talk about this a little bit tomorrow when it comes to basketball, you instantly become the best basketball program or conference in the country. You have Arizona, Kansas, Baylor. You got 3 top 10 programs right there. Then you've got, in that second tier, you've got Houston, which is a top, going to be again, it's not a top 5 program, but they're going to be
good.
Top 5, but they're really good. Yeah. West Virginia has multiple Final Fours in the last 15 years. Texas Tech was in the national title game, which still feels weird to say, back in 2018. So basketball, you're really, really good. And in football, if you bring in Utah, you got Baylor, which is essentially Oregon in football. I think that's fair to say at this point. Baylor has 3 top 10 finishes in football in the last 6 years, and with 3 different coaches doing that as well. So it's a multi-coach school as well. Then you would have Utah, a top, what's Utah? Top 15 program, top 20,
sure.
Worst.
Sure.
Then Oklahoma State is a top 25 entity. Cincinnati is coming into the conference. Obviously, their work speaks for itself the last 3 to 4 years. You've still got TCU. You've still got, now I'm drawing a total blank on another team. But football to me is every bit as good as the Pac-12, with basketball being a huge step up.
It's not, well, why? Okay. Why wouldn't the Pac-12 do the same thing and go after those teams in the Big 12?
Because I don't think they have any interest in joining. That's the difference, though. I don't have any insight on this. I don't think they have any interest in joining the Pac-12.
Go ahead. No, go.
It doesn't seem like anybody really, when you look around the rumors, there's nothing, and maybe this is just an indication of how low people regard the Pac-12, but you don't really, outside of maybe San Diego State, you don't really hear anybody talking about the Pac-12 picking up prominent schools. You hear about other conferences picking up prominent schools from the Pac-12.
Well, now it's time for the Pac-12 to get aggressive, and aggressive is 1 or 2. Because let's look again. Let's go back, because right now we're living in Pac-12 shock mode. Okay, and we understand that, when Bill Walton called the Pac-12 the Conference of Champions, it was a laughable joke. We get it. And now it's even more so of a laughable joke because USC and UCLA clearly didn't believe it. Right. So obviously, in terms of their general body of work out of the Power 5 conferences, the Pac-12 has not represented itself particularly well. Okay, I get that. But if you look last year, based on what the Big 12 added to try to make up the difference between Oklahoma and Texas, it just wasn't the same. None of those teams bring in that brand recognition. So when the Pac-12 brings in San Diego State and talks about Boise State as a possible option, you look at, UNLV. I think UNLV has a chance to be, oddly enough, even though their football program is a disaster, I think UNLV has an opportunity to be kind of a dark horse player in this because the Las Vegas market is growing so quickly. But you're familiar. Let me ask you this. Let's take a quick break here because you're pretty familiar with the Las Vegas market, and I want to get your take on this. But first, let's talk about Rock Auto. There's not many times where I totally yield the floor to somebody else, but John Schuster has immense experience with Rock Auto. Besides being a fantastic place to get car parts, make the case as to why Rock Auto should be in everybody's vocab. Well, you can get parts cheaper, and you can get parts more conveniently, and you can get parts online. That's rockauto.com. They've got pretty much every imaginable part there is. I have used them on 2 separate occasions and then found mechanics who were willing to put those parts in. And the last time I did this, a shop was going to charge me $1,100 for the part and about $1,400 for the repair. I found the part on Rock Auto for about $350. Had it mailed to me, found a mechanic who was able to put it in, got out on that repair for $1,000 less. So that saved me about 67% just by doing it that way. If you're a DIY person, then there's no other option than Rock Auto. You're going to get great prices as far as you're going to get great competitive prices and convenience. And if you're able to do it yourself, that doesn't hurt either.
Right. All right. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with you. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats. All right, let's talk about San Diego State and UNLV right there. First, UNLV, you mentioned that. Do you believe that there is a little bit of a, I don't want to say a sleeping giant effect, but if UNLV was to join the Pac-12, what do you think about that, especially from a TV perspective, a market perspective, and a competitive perspective?
I think the aspect of that, and you made the sleeping giant comparison, and even though there may be a little wink, wink, nod, nod, ha, ha, ha in that, because we make that joke about ASU a lot, I think the way that the city dynamics are laid out is very similar. Vegas right now is about 20, 25 years behind what the growth aspect that Phoenix was going through from an athletic standpoint. And in this regard, UNLV and ASU are very similar. They both had success in different sports, leveled off a little bit, and then professional sports came in and pushed them to the back burner. And they've had difficult times being able to succeed consistently since then. Vegas is a pro sports town, however, and they're incredibly supportive of being a pro sports town. The Golden Knights are a big deal. Mm-hmm. The Raiders are a big deal. They're making heavy plays for baseball expansion. They're at the top of either baseball moves or baseball expansion, and it looks like the NBA is on the fringe of looking seriously at Vegas as well. Vegas is a pro sports town, but there's still a little bit of a love affair with UNLV. So if UNLV can get into a major sports conference as opposed to the Mountain West, I think people in Vegas who are often sports fans will look at that as something that they pay a lot more attention to than they ultimately are now. And as a result, they may be able to recruit a little better. I think Vegas becomes a very interesting market as even compared to some of the other potential television markets that are being discussed in overall expansion with some of these other conferences. I would, even as wretched as UNLV is from a football standpoint and forgettable as they've been in basketball since Tarkanian left, I think there's very real potential that that UNLV is a team that you could seriously consider if you wanted to engage in massive expansion. Obviously, Boise State is in that conversation, and San Diego State is clearly in that conversation. And now one of the things that you look back at, there was a lot of discussion 20 years ago, 25 years ago, quietly with coaches and administrators behind the scenes when the Pac-10 or Pac-12 or whatever it ultimately was floating the possibility of San Diego State joining the conference. And they were afraid of San Diego State being a part of the equation because lots of people like to go to San Diego. Yeah. It's a great city. And it's close in proximity. You can pluck a lot of players down from LA. And there was serious concern that San Diego State could be a competitive problem for a lot of the foundational members in the Pac-12, and they pushed against that. Now you look back at that and you say, wow, that was a short-sighted decision. So
was Lute Olson one of the people that thought that?
I don't believe so. I think this was much more a California concern.
Okay.
So the Bay Area schools and the behind the scenes, as I understand it, take this for what it's worth. Maybe a lot of this is urban myth. The Bay Area schools and the schools that are now leaving the conference wanted to land on they wanted to talk about the awesomeness of their academics, while Oregon State and Washington State were in their conference,
right,
and ASU was in their conference. They wanted to talk about how San Diego State wasn't up to the academic standards of the Pac-12, and so therefore didn't belong in the Pac-12. We all knew it was a load of crap. Right. We all knew that it was a load of crap based on concern that San Diego State could be really competitive. But now that San Diego State isn't in the conference, if there's expansion, they're obviously at the top of the list, but maybe it's too late.
All right, I'll tell you one thing, though. It's never too late with Built Bar. So you look at San Diego State, it's a thriving metropolis, many strong people in there. And you watch these Utah teams. We've been talking about Utah quite a bit. When you watch Utah football, first thing you think is big, strong, physical. John Schuster, you mentioned at the time, is there any coincidence that Built Bar is based out of Utah?
Zero. That is not a coincidence. That is reality.
That is reality, and that is where we are right now with the Built Bar phenomenon. Get into Built Bar right now. John Schuster likes the blueberry. I like the blueberry as well. It tastes good. It's an easy pre-post workout, whatever you want to get. We're coming back with you, and we're going to talk then about where we ultimately see this landing. Then tomorrow, we're going to talk about how fun it would be for Arizona to play basketball in another conference, perhaps. We'll be right back with you. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats. I'm your host, Mike Luke. All right, Shu, we've talked about what the future holds probably for Arizona, what it could hold for the conferences. 5 years from now, where are we in college athletics? Where is Arizona situated in that prism?
5 years from now, Arizona is going to be part of a juggernaut conference that is not the Big Ten or the SEC. The Big Ten and the Big 12 and the Pac-12 are going to consolidate. That is they're going to fight it in the early stages. They're going to try to hold their ground. They're going to try to, but eventually the two of them are going to come to the table, recognize that more is better for them, and they are going to create something like at least 24 team conference that will be broken up into 4 categories of 6 teams each. And then the winners of those, when it comes to football, are going to play in what amounts to being a Final Four. And then they're going to have their own championship. And whether their own champion then plays against a final champion from the SEC and Big Ten remains to be seen. But I think the direction that this is ultimately going to go is that there's going to be massive consolidation, and the Big 12 and the Pac-12 as we know it is not going to exist, but they're going to, they won't exist separately. They will, as all those bumper stickers say, coexist.
Will the Pac-12 or Pac-12 tournament, will the NCAA tournament, will that remain unaltered?
Do you mean in college basketball?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think what's happening in most of this, and this is part of the interesting dynamic. And again, it's so early, it's speculative. I'm just throwing crap out there like everybody else. But I think there's a very real chance that college football is going to be a different entity than the rest of college athletics. And that's why basically the Big Ten and the SEC is going to, in essence, play each other and say, we're the champions. And there's going to have to be mass consolidation among the other schools that are left out of that conversation to try to say, no, we're pretty damn good too. Football is a different entity. The rest of the sports, I think, are going to be under the relative auspices of the NCAA.
Okay, now, will the national champion in college football, will it be whoever wins it, and I realize that this is probably a little bit of an oxymoron, will that champion be recognized universally as the champion the way that it is now?
No, unless what I think there's going to be a window of, especially with my theory of mass consolidation, is that there's going to be a lot of discussion at the end. Let's pick out a team. Let's say Oregon, because I think this or Oklahoma State. Let's go with Baylor. Baylor is the team that survives the Big Pac-24, and they advance through they win their portion of the league. They advance through their Final Four. They're the last team standing that wins that playoff. There are going to be a lot of people out there and a lot of sports reporters who have votes who are going to say, was Alabama really the best team in the country? They never played Baylor. So the conversation in a weird way is going to be a lot like it was before the nonsense effort to try to create a national champion. So we're basically going to go back 40 years until we go forward. Somebody in this process is going to recognize there's a crap load of money to be made out there to have Baylor play Alabama to determine whatever some real quote unquote air quote champion is in college football. And that one-off game, I think, has the potential to make a lot of money.
All right, we're going to be back with you tomorrow talking about what Arizona basketball would look like in the Big 12. For John Schuster, I'm Mike Luke. Thanks for keeping it locked.